Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines. We're very pleased to have on the show our United States Senator, David Vitter. Senator Vitter represents the over 4 million residents of our state of Louisiana, and he's going to talk to us about how the United States Senate works, the House of Representatives, and of course the Presidency. He's also going to talk to us about the big issues that face our country, the huge national debt, and all the other issues that surround that, including our 9.6 unemployment rate. So join us on the next Legal Lines with our United States Senator, David Vitter. Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and I'm very pleased to have on the show today our United States Senator, David Vitter. David, thank you again so much.
Thank you, Locke. Thanks for the invite. It's always great to be here.
Well, I appreciate it. Things have, it seems like it was only a few months ago that we last talked, but a lot of stuff has happened.
Yeah, a lot of stuff has happened in the country. This is a critical time. Because of that, this is a critical election coming up in November.
It's extraordinary, and I know we did this last time, but quickly tell the folks a little bit about your educational background, because it's unique in the sense that you're an economist.
Well, first of all, I grew up in Louisiana. Maybe that's what I'm most proud of. I think I got a great upbringing from great parents and learned Louisiana values. But I have gotten a good education too. Went to Harvard undergrad. I was a Rhodes Scholar in England. And then I came full circle and went to law school here at Tulane and have an economics degree and a law degree and practiced law for a while before going into politics.
And you're also being modest. You attended Oxford, as I understand it, and also graduated with all kinds of honors, magna cum laude,
it was a great 2 years. Academically, it was really interesting. Also, just getting to meet people from around the world, other Rhodes Scholars, others also getting to travel a lot was really a great experience.
Well, let's dive into it.
Sure.
Because you're an economist, you're educated in that field, and our economy is in a shambles.
It is. I'm very concerned that we're only a step or two behind Greece and Spain and Portugal, teetering economies, teetering monetary systems. In fact, even Hillary Clinton said recently that our spending and debt is so bad we're losing control of our own destiny. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't agree with Hillary much, but I absolutely agree with her about that, and we need to reverse that course on spending and debt.
Frankly, it's terrifying because I imagine because she's the Secretary of State for the United States, she's addressing it from a security interest.
Absolutely. And our spending and debt situation is completely unsustainable. I mean, we have a $13 trillion debt. That's bad enough. But what's worse is under the present federal 10-year budget, we're due to double that in 5 years, to triple that in 10 years. It is just crazy.
And that does not include what is called the unfunded obligations, which could be another 30, 40, 50 trillion dollars.
Yeah, the mandatory spending, the entitlements is even worse.
So what do we do? Let's first talk about what the current administration did, because they came in and they took a lot of steps. Let's discuss what those steps were.
Well, first of all, Locke, on the spending and debt side, we had issues and problems before this administration. And a lot of folks in Washington, Republicans as well as Democrats, let spending get out of control. So let me state that at the beginning. I think that's absolutely true. Unfortunately, what's happened in the last 2 years is we are in this spending hole, and the President administration put down the shovel and took up a backhoe and just increased the digging tenfold. 3 ways: all of the bailouts, number 2, the Obama stimulus, $1 trillion when you count interest on the borrowed money, clearly hasn't created the jobs as promised. And number 3, that Obama budget I mentioned that doubles our already sky-high debt in 5 years and triples it in 10 years. You take those 3 things alone, and you're talking about another $13 trillion of new debt on top of our existing mountain of debt.
David, it's almost, in my mind, I'm kind of going, it's almost like the administration in a year and a half spent what most presidents would have spent over 10, 12 years.
More than that, they've spent more, well, let me back up. They've created more new debt than every previous president combined in terms of the debt they've created.
Since George Washington.
Correct. Since George Washington. From George to George Washington, George Bush, you take that amount of debt, they've created more than that in 2 years. Now, if it was pulling our economy out of the doldrums and creating growth, and we could buy that debt down, that would be one thing. But clearly the stimulus has not done that. You know, President Obama promised it would keep us below 8% unemployment. It would lead to economic recovery. Instead, unemployment went above 10%, came down a little bit, hovering at 9.5, 9.7, which is horrible.
A lot of folks, millions and millions of folks are out of jobs.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, the growth rate of the economy is at best 1.6%.
It's miserable, and job growth is even worse than that. And now economists and others are really talking about the possibility, unfortunately, of a so-called double dip recession. Not just stagnancy, but another dip down because of these threats.
And I've heard that even if that doesn't happen, and that's a possibility, that apparently if there's a recovery of any kind in the future, it's going to be what's called a jobless recovery.
Yeah.
Explain that to the folks.
Well, the best prospect, like you say, is basically a flat line, status quo, some growth possibly, but very little job growth. Job growth only much later. So we're facing the prospect of a continuing recession.
So a continuation of 9.5% unemployment, which translates into millions
Absolutely.
of families without jobs.
For an extended period of time. And that just decimates families. You know, it's one thing to go through a rough patch. It's tough enough to transition from one job to another, even with no gap. But when you have that sort of unemployment, when you have extended unemployment, it's so hurtful and so demoralizing that is really tough on tens of millions of Americans.
Let's talk about the consequences. Explain to us what happens when the federal government is going out and borrowing money, what that does to the ability of individuals and businesses to borrow money.
Yeah. Well, first of all, in terms of immediate job growth, it's not working. You know, again, the stimulus, it was promised to hold us below 8% unemployment. We went above 10. We're still at 9.5, 9.7. But secondly, longer term, that amount of spending and debt, which is unsustainable, really threatens hyperinflation eventually. It threatens devaluing the dollar. It eventually will make it tougher for people in the private sector to borrow money because it's going to push interest rates up eventually. We certainly don't have that now, but that has to follow if we hold this course. And so that's the next economic crisis I'm concerned about. The last one was bad. It was a banking crisis, a financial crisis, but thank God we're through that. I'm concerned about avoiding the next economic crisis, which is going to be based on that unsustainable spending and debt.
Explain to the folks when you say hyperinflation, what you mean. I'm thinking Jimmy Carter days, exactly. 21% interest.
Exactly. What I'm talking about is Jimmy Carter or worse. And that decimated families, made it almost impossible to buy a home. You know, when you had to go take out a mortgage at 19, 20, 21% interest rates, that cripples people's future. So that's what I'm talking about, that or worse.
And that's because there's not enough money out there to provide for everybody's needs.
Yeah.
And so the cost of borrowing that money goes up.
If the U.S. government is borrowing these stacks and stacks and stacks of money, that's crowding out everybody else. And that's driving interest rates up. It's supply and demand. So if the demand for borrowed money is that great, the price is going to go up.
And so the flip side of that coin would be, the alternative would be, well, we're just going to print a bunch of money, and that's when you said that there would be devaluation of the dollar.
When the dollar goes through the floor, it isn't worth anything. We see that threat in European economies, particularly Greece and Spain and Portugal.
And so what might have cost $10 turns into costing $20 or $30 or $40.
Right.
All right, let's continue this on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith on Legal Lines with our United States Senator David Vitter. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and again, very pleased to have on the show today our United States Senator David Vitter. David, again, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Locke. Thanks for the invite.
We're talking about the economy. You're an economist. You're a lawyer. Let's talk about now what the president is proposing, since we're not doing any better than we were when he first took office. And we spent $3 trillion.
Yeah. Basically, he's proposing son of stimulus, another smaller stimulus. Now, I will say at least it's more focused on infrastructure this time, which I think is better than some of the programmatic spending.
I'm confused because I thought the first money, I remember hearing shovel-ready jobs and all that kind of stuff.
You're right, Locke. You heard that rhetoric. The reality was all the road, bridge, highway projects taken together were 2.5% of that entire bill. And so it was big on the rhetoric, it was big in the speeches, it was very little in terms of the reality of the bill. In this new stimulus, $50 billion, he's talking more infrastructure. I am concerned, though, that it's not going to lead to immediate impact because even the most quote-unquote shovel-ready project takes a year, year and a half to tee up with engineering drawings and other things.
And I've actually heard even up to 6 years before the full impact is felt. So that doesn't seem like that's going to help us quickly. And I'm understanding that a part of the proposal may be that they're going to allow businesses to write off expenditures, 100% of expenditures or investment in equipment and such up through 2011. But at the same time, they're going to raise taxes on small businesses.
Well,
it's kind of like I'm going to give it to you here, but I'm going to take it from you here.
That's the problem, Locke. I support those sorts of job growth, small business incentives. The problem is, at the same time, as you say, he's offering these incentives with plenty of strings attached. He's taking away, he's increasing taxes with the right hand because President Obama does not want to extend all of the present rates. He doesn't want to continue all the 2001, 2003 tax cuts. He wants a lot of them to expire, in particular those that deal with folks who can create jobs, innovate, save, invest, grow their business.
Let's discuss that, because I hear it referred to as the Bush tax cuts, is kind of how it's named. And from what I understand, President Obama says that he is going to maintain those tax cuts for 95% of the population, but for 5% he wants to let them lapse and the tax rate's going to go back up. Why is that not a good thing?
Well, I think we shouldn't raise taxes on anybody in the middle of a recession. And that's not just me saying that. I think every economist from Milton Friedman on the right to Keynesians on the left say you don't raise taxes in the middle of a recession. It's anti-growth. It stalls job creation. In particular, when the president says, well, we're going to keep the rates where they are for 95% of Americans, I would ask, okay, what about job creators? What percentage of job creators are going to get slammed with a tax increase? Because job creators are on that end of the spectrum that is going to get a big tax increase.
So it falls within the 5%. That includes small businesses. We're not just talking about individuals. We're talking about small businesses.
As you know, as an attorney, a lot of small business is organized through individual rates. They don't necessarily set up a corporation.
It's called subchapter S.
They pay the top individual rate. So you're not talking about folks sitting on a beach sipping a pina colada.
That's right.
You're talking about family farms. You're talking about neighborhood dry cleaners. You're talking about small businesses all through Greater Baton Rouge, all through Louisiana.
And so when he says he's going to raise taxes on those folks, really what we're saying is he's planning on raising taxes on small businesses, and those, as I understand it, statistically, small business produces 60 to 70% of the jobs in the private sector.
Absolutely. If that's 5% of Americans, that's 70, 80% of job creators, innovators, investors, entrepreneurs that actually can create jobs and get us out of this recession.
So what is, that's President Obama's, I guess, position on how he's going to attack it right now. What is your position and the Republican Party's position on this issue?
I think the first thing we need to do is remove the threats against those job creators that are holding back recovery now. And
like what?
Well, like this tax issue. We should extend, and there are Democrats who agree with this, we should extend all the present rates for at least 2 years. In fact, Peter Orszag, who just left the Obama administration as the OMB director, agrees with that. He agrees with the economic consensus. You don't increase taxes on anyone in a recession.
And OMB, define that for the folks.
That's the chief budget office of any administration.
And they're supposed to be what, nonpartisan?
Right.
They're not Republican, they're not Democratic.
And Peter Orszag was in this administration. He's left, and he agrees that we shouldn't be increasing those taxes on anyone. So that's number one. Number two, we should remove other threats that this administration is imposing on people. Business is scared to death about their labor agenda. Issues like card check, where they're trying to take away the secret ballot from union organizing elections.
Okay, explain that in a little more detail. I'm not sure many folks.
Sure.
So when you say card check, what, they got to present a card? And
yeah, right now, under federal law, if a union wants to organize a shop, a business, they have a process that leads up to an election, and all of the workers vote by secret ballot, just like we vote for public officials. And if the union gets 50% plus one, then the business is unionized.
Okay.
Under card check, you do away with the secret ballot, and instead, union officials could visit employees one by one at night at their home and present them with a card and say,
check here,
sign the damn card, and get 50% plus one is sent that way. That's not a free and fair election.
No, it's not.
That's not democratic. That's not devoid of undue influence. And that is a real threat to business as well.
What other type of regulation or
healthcare,
policies?
you know, we just came through the big Obamacare debate. Unfortunately, that bill, which is law, which is being implemented over the next 4 or 5 years,
which
has
is
a
2,000 plus pages.
Yeah, 2,800 plus pages, is a lot of threats and a lot of new burden to business. Increased healthcare costs, increased premiums for businesses and individuals, a lot of those threats there as well.
In fact, from what I'm hearing, health insurance premiums are increasing right now because they know that's coming at the health insurers know it's coming down the road at them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest impact for employees could be that a lot of businesses may say, you know what, we're getting out of the healthcare business. We're not going to provide it because under this bill we have another option. We can just pay a set fee or penalty to the federal government and just get out of the business. And that's actually going to be cheaper than their new healthcare premiums. And so they may dump employees in a lot of cases to the public option, to the government plan, and just get out of the business altogether.
I've heard that the businesses are also quite concerned about just a bunch of new regulation coming out that's expensive. Explain that to the folks.
Well, in healthcare, that's certainly going to be the case. If the bill itself is over 2,800 pages, by the time it gets to all the rules and regs that the bureaucrats write coming out of the bill, it's going to be literally 10 times to 100 times that amount. And that's going to be an enormous bureaucratic burden for business and others to deal with.
So to summarize kind of the Republicans' position, it's to reduce tax, or keep taxes as they are, reduce costly regulation, and do everything in their power to promote job creation.
Yeah, put more simply, it's to get out of the way of the American economy, and American job creators don't hinder that growth with more and more threats from Washington.
All right, we'll continue this on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith on Legal Lines with our United States Senator David Vitter. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and again, very pleased to have on the show today our United States Senator David Vitter. Again, Dave, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Locke, very much.
Let's explain to the folks why this election that's coming up on November 2nd is so important. I hear a lot of times the president or the Democratic spokesfolks indicate that the Republicans aren't participating, aren't cooperating, and thus certain things aren't taking place. But in truth and reality, as I understand it, they control the presidency, they control the House of Representatives, and they control the Senate.
Absolutely.
So explain to folks the way things have worked up to now.
Well, you know, like a few years ago, everybody decried obstructionism and things being blocked in Congress. Now that sort of situation looks pretty inviting considering the alternative, because there's been this huge lurch to the left with a very leftist Obama administration, very left-leaning U.S. House, very left-leaning U.S. Senate. And the Democrats control everything. If folks want real bipartisanship, you need to start with numbers that demand real bipartisanship, because we've been pretty much locked out as conservatives, as Republicans, because the president and his congressional leaders don't even need our votes, except in some cases for 1 or 2.
And so, just for an example, they've got what's called a huge majority in the House, and that's just majority rule. So they got 51%; they're done.
Right.
And the Senate, you needed 60.
Most
Scott Brown kind of
Senate,
changed that a little bit.
Yeah, most things in the Senate need 60 votes. Right now, the Democrats are at 59. So if they get every Democratic senator, they need one Republican to pass almost anything.
And so that only happened in the last several months.
Correct.
Prior to that, they had a supermajority.
They had 60 for a while.
They could do whatever they wanted,
Absolutely.
and frankly, they did.
Yeah. And so, you know, when people talk about bipartisanship, I can tell you from working there that the first thing you need for bipartisanship is the numbers that demand bipartisanship. Because when one party just has the whole show, they're not going to invite bipartisanship. They don't need to. They're going to just jam through things their way, as President Obama did with the stimulus Obamacare.
So if this election come November 2nd, the House changes from being a majority of Democrats to a majority of Republicans, what happens? Explain to the folks what difference that makes.
What happens is all of a sudden you need bipartisanship in Washington, because otherwise things aren't going to just get passed by one party. So I think we would move to the middle. We would move away from the far left extreme view of the Obama administration in terms of legislation that could actually pass. I think that would be a healthy thing. Number one, I think that leftist route is very dangerous. But number two, it would demand coming together and would demand bipartisanship.
And I guess if the Senate, which is currently a majority of Democrats, turns to a majority of Republicans, likewise a similar analysis.
Same thing. And even if it's not majority of Republicans, let's say Republicans pick up 7 seats, it would be much more evenly balanced. And again, for any proposal to get to 60 would take true bipartisanship, not just one Republican vote.
And so for the folks to understand how this works, David, let's explain how a law is passed.
Right. Right.
And why it's so important for this to take place, for there to be a check on power.
Right. Well, first of all, any president has the bully pulpit. And so although a president doesn't have a direct vote in Congress, any president is the leader in terms of proposals on big issues like economic growth or taxes and spending. So President Obama, in this case, for the last 2 years, has been proposing a lot of those initiatives. But then it has to pass in both the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. As you said, it needs a simple majority only in the House. But in the Senate, most things, not everything, but most things need 60 votes.
And so, as I understand the division of powers, the Congress, which is made up of the Senate and the House, has to pass legislation. He may come up with the idea, but it has to be put down in writing and passed. Right. And so that's how legislation is passed. And then they also control the purse strings and confirmations. Right. Explain that.
Right. Well, spending has to go through both the House and the Senate as well. In fact, it has to be initiated in the House. And then in terms of major appointments, Supreme Court appointments, cabinet nominees, that goes to the Senate. The president makes the appointment, but it needs a 2/3 vote called confirmation in the Senate.
And thus the reason why this election, November 2nd, is so important is if you're a person who thinks that the country is going in the wrong direction and that we need a check or a constraint on the power or the steps that have been taken, then you need to make sure you vote.
Absolutely. Most Americans, certainly most Louisianians, think we've been on the wrong path for the last 2 years. The only way to begin to change that is to change the Congress this November 2nd. We can't wait, in my opinion, to the next presidential election, because 2 more years, it may be too far gone. We need to make major changes this November 2nd, put real checks and balances on this president, demand real bipartisanship.
Let's talk about the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe. Explain to the folks the consequence of the moratorium and basically what that is.
Well, of course, the explosion was a horrible tragedy, starting with 11 lost lives, those families that'll never be the same. Then there was the environmental disaster, and that was a true disaster, the biggest environmental disaster in U.S. history. But now, even after the oil flow has stopped, we're facing a continuing economic disaster because the president instituted this drilling moratorium in Deepwater. And that, bottom line, Locke, is real simple. that is threatening to cost us more jobs than the oil flow itself. And we're still dealing with that. That's bad for the country, but it's devastating for Louisiana.
So when we say moratorium, basically what he said is stop. Right. No more drilling.
No more, correct.
Until I tell you you can do it. And as I recall, lawsuits were filed. Trial court said you can't do that, Mr. President. Appellate courts agreed with the trial court. But the bottom line is these guys aren't going to put a multi-million dollar, billion-dollar equipment out there not knowing what's going to happen.
That's still in litigation. And so the companies are not rushing out to restart their operations when it could be shut down any day. So although the industry and conservatives like me won some victories in court, nobody's rushing out to restart operations because at the end of the day, the administration has the upper hand. They're in charge of the regulatory end of things.
And let's explain the consequences just from a national security interest concern.
Well, I really think this is bad for the country. Like we all know, we're way too dependent on foreign sources of energy. And it's not like those foreign sources are our best allies and best friends. There are, in some cases, horrible regimes in the Middle East. So we're way too dependent now. And on top of that, we're going to shut down our domestic capability. That's clearly moving in the wrong direction. Now, I'm all for getting to a new energy future, getting away from fossil fuels.
Sure, I think
but we're not going to do that next month, next year. It's going to take multiple decades. And so we need a bridge to that future, including natural gas and other fossil fuels.
What do you think about this $20 billion fund? You think it's going to be fair?
I hope it's going to be enough. Of course, BP's liability doesn't end. If it's not enough, BP is still liable. It's a down payment, liable for all those damages.
David, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll continue this on the next. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines and our United States Senator, David Vitter. Thank you for being with us.